In a vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists an unwritten law whispered in the darkest corners of space stations and echoed through the neural networks of ancient AI constructs. It is a warning that has survived longer than empires, outlasted the birth and death of stars, and remained constant through the endless cycle of galactic politics. Never provoke the humans. They didn't obey the first time, and they won't obey now. Most species dismiss it as mythology, a cautionary tale from a bygone era when the galaxy was younger and more chaotic. The humans, after all, appear so ordinary. They have no natural armor like the Kithrin, no telepathic abilities like the Zephyrians, no technological supremacy like the Makani's collective. They are pink, soft creatures who seem to break easily and die quickly. But the ancient races remember. They remember the Silence Wars, when humans first emerged from their small blue world and were told to submit or perish. They remember how the humans smiled, nodded politely, and then proceeded to tear apart 3 galactic empires with nothing but stubborn determination and an alarming tendency to ignore the word impossible. The Eternal Council thought humans had learned their place after the Great Accord was signed. For 200 years, humanity had been peaceful, trading partners who followed galactic law and contributed to interstellar stability. They had even helped smaller species defend themselves against raiders and pirates. But empires have short memories, and new powers rise with the arrogance of youth. The hegemony of Zirian, in their gleaming ships and boundless pride, have never faced humans in war. They have never seen what happens when you corner Earth's children and give them no choice but to fight. They're about to learn why the ancients shake their heads and whisper warnings when ambitious young civilizations speak of conquering the human territories. Because humans have a very particular way of dealing with ultimatums. They don't. The crystalline spires of New Geneva stretched toward the artificial sky of the space habitat, their surfaces reflecting the gentle light of the station's central star simulator. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the observation deck of the Human Diplomatic Corps building, watching cargo ships drift between the massive support struts that held their world together. 200 years ago, her ancestors had built this place as a symbol of humanity's commitment to peace and cooperation in the galaxy. Today, she feared it might become a symbol of something else entirely. The communication array on her desk chimed with an incoming priority message. The holographic display materialized, showing the familiar face of Admiral Hassan Okafor, commander of the Third Fleet. His dark skin bore the weathered look of a career military officer, but his eyes carried something Sarah had rarely seen there before: genuine concern. Ambassador Chun. Admiral Okafor began without preamble. We've just received the Zirian hegemony's response to your diplomatic overtures. I'm afraid it's not what we hoped for. Sarah turned away from the viewport and activated her desk's privacy shields. The soft blue glow that enveloped her office meant their conversation was now completely secure from any form of surveillance. Show me, she said simply. The hologram shifted, and suddenly, Sarah was looking at a being that represented everything the hegemony stood for. High Executor Zithrin was 9 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with the blue-black sheen that marked the Zirian nobility. His 4 arms moved in complex patterns as he spoke, each gesture calculated to display the intricate scarification that covered his limbs, marks that told the story of his victories and conquests. People of Earth. Zithrin's voice carried the harmonic undertones that made Zirian speech sound like a choir of razor blades. The hegemony has grown tired of your stubborn refusal to accept the natural order of the galaxy. For too long, you have occupied territories that rightfully belong to superior civilizations. For too long, you have harbored rebellious species that should be under proper guidance. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony wasn't just making territorial demands. They were talking about the dozen species that had sought refuge in human space over the past century. The Kelvani, whose homeworld had been strip-mined by corporate raiders. the Thrinidae, whose crystalline biology made them valuable as living computers to unscrupulous traders. The Osran refugees who had fled when their government had tried to sell them as a servitor species. Therefore, Zethrin continued, the hegemony makes this final offer. Surrender control of all territories beyond your original solar system. Hand over all refugee populations for proper placement within the galactic hierarchy. Accept hegemony oversight of your military capabilities and industrial production. You have 72 standard hours to comply. The High Executor's mandibles clicked together in what Sarah recognized as the Xerian equivalent of a smile. Should you choose to refuse, the hegemony will be forced to bring order to your territories through more direct means. We estimate that complete pacification of human space will require no more than 6 months. Resistance will be met with the full weight of our military might. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah staring at empty air where the hologram had been. Admiral Okafor's face reappeared, his expression grim. They've got a fleet of 1,200 capital ships massed at the edge of the neutral zone, he reported. Our long-range scouts confirm it's the largest military formation the galaxy has seen since the Silence Wars. They're not bluffing about their capability to follow through on this ultimatum. Sarah sank into her chair, her mind racing through the implications. What's the assessment from Fleet Command? Not good, Okafor admitted. We've got maybe 300 ships that could stand against their capital vessels, and most of those are in the outer colonies on anti-piracy patrol. If they hit us now, we'd be looking at a fighting withdrawal that could last years. The civilian casualties would be... He didn't need to finish. Sarah had seen the classified reports on Xerian military doctrine. They believed in making examples. Entire worlds have been rendered uninhabitable when they had encountered resistance during their expansion campaigns. What about the Galactic Council? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. They're calling for restraint from both sides and suggesting mediated negotiations, Okafor said with barely concealed disgust. The Altarian Republic is making sympathetic noises, but they won't risk war with the hegemony. The Vegan Commonwealth has already issued a statement supporting galactic stability through proper territorial administration. Sarah wasn't surprised. The galaxy's major powers had long memories of human military capability, but they also remembered that humans had consistently chosen diplomacy over warfare for the past 2 centuries. To them, humanity appeared to have grown soft, trading their legendary stubbornness for the comfortable predictability of peaceful coexistence. There is one piece of potentially relevant intelligence, Okafor continued. Our sources in Hegemony Space report that High Executor Zethrin has been studying historical databases, specifically records from the Silence Wars period. That's either very good or very bad for us, Sarah mused. Either he's learning to be cautious, or he's convinced himself that humans today aren't the same species that fought the Triumvirate Alliance to a standstill. Given the tone of his ultimatum, I'm leaning toward the latter, Okafor replied. The question is, what do we do about it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the peaceful scene beyond her office. Families walked along the habitat's recreational levels. Children played in parks that had never known the fear of orbital bombardment, and merchants from a dozen species conducted their business in an atmosphere of mutual trust and cooperation. This was the world humanity had built after the Silence Wars, a world where former enemies became trading partners, where refugees found new homes, and where the scars of ancient conflicts had finally begun to heal. Schedule an emergency session of the Colonial Congress for tomorrow morning, she said finally. Send priority communications to all fleet commanders. I want a full assessment of our current military readiness. And Hassan, yes, Ambassador, activate the deep archives. I want every file from the Silence Wars period pulled and analyzed. If the hegemony wants to study our history, we'd better make sure we remember it ourselves. After Okafor's image faded, Sarah remained at her desk as the habitat's artificial day cycle began to transition toward evening. The light from the Central Star simulator took on a warmer tone, and the gentle sounds of the evening shift change drifted up from the levels below. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear children laughing. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from her daughter on New Tokyo Colony. Lisa was expecting her first child in a few months, Sarah's first grandchild. The message was a simple video of Lisa and her husband working in their garden, preparing the soil for next season's planting. They looked happy, secure in their small corner of the universe. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine explaining to her daughter why that grandchild might be born into a galaxy at war. She tried to picture the refugee camps that would spring up if the outer colonies fell to hegemony occupation forces. She thought about the Threnodai families who had finally found safety in human space, only to face the possibility of being handed over to the very forces they had fled. The communicator chimed again. This time it was a message from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenoarchaeologist who had been studying pre-contact ruins on the Rimworlds. Elena's face appeared in the small hologram, her usual enthusiasm replaced by something that looked like fear. "Sarah, I need to speak with you immediately," Elena said. "I've been analyzing some of the inscriptions we found on Kepler Station, the ones from the predecessor civilization. I think I know why the hegemony is moving now, and why they're so confident about facing humans in battle." The message ended, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. The predecessor civilization had vanished over 50,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and cryptic warnings that most archaeologists dismissed as primitive mythology. What could Elena have found that was relevant to their current crisis? As night fell over New Geneva habitat, Sarah made her decision. She opened a secure channel to Admiral Okafor and began composing a message that would be transmitted to every human colony, every fleet commander, and every refugee community under their protection. To all citizens and allies of the Human Colonial Alliance, she began. "We have received an ultimatum from the Xerian hegemony demanding our surrender and the abandonment of all those who have sought sanctuary among us. The hegemony believes that 2 centuries of peace have made us weak. They believe that our commitment to diplomacy means we have forgotten how to fight. They are about to discover how wrong they are." She paused, thinking of her daughter, of the Threnodai children playing in New Geneva's parks, of the thousands of species that had found new homes among the stars because humans had chosen to offer protection rather than exploitation. "The Colonial Congress will convene tomorrow to consider our response," she continued. "But I want every human community, every allied species, and every friend of humanity to understand one thing. We will not abandon those who trust us. We will not surrender our freedom to those who mistake compassion for weakness. And we will not bow to threats, no matter how overwhelming they may seem." As she prepared to send the message, Sarah remembered something her grandfather had told her years ago. He had been a veteran of the Silence Wars, one of the few survivors of the Battle of Wolf 359. "The thing about humans," he had said, "is that we don't know when to quit. Our enemies always assume that's a weakness. They always find out it's our greatest strength." The hegemony had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had looked at 2 centuries of human restraint and mistaken it for submission. They had seen humanity's willingness to negotiate and assumed it meant unwillingness to fight. Most critically, they had forgotten the most important lesson of the Silence Wars. Humans were never more dangerous than when someone tried to tell them they had no choice. Across human space, the message began to arrive. On New Tokyo, colonists who had never seen warfare began organizing militia training. On Tau Ceti Station, retired fleet officers emerged from civilian life to volunteer their services. In the asteroid mining belts, ship crews who had spent decades hauling or suddenly found themselves discussing weapons modifications and tactical formations. The refugees were not idle either. Threnodai engineers began adapting their crystalline technology for military applications. Kelvani manufacturers retooled their production lines for warship components. Oseran pilots, whose species had evolved in the complex asteroid fields of their home system, volunteered for what everyone knew would be the most dangerous missions. And in the deep archives of human military history, Automated systems began pulling files that hadn't been accessed in 200 years. Technical specifications for weapons that had been decommissioned in the name of peace. Tactical doctrines that had been developed in the crucible of total war. Strategic plans that had been classified so deeply that most humans had forgotten they existed. The hegemony had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. They had no idea that they had just started a countdown to their own destruction. High Executor Zethrin stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays that showed his vast fleet in perfect formation. 1,200 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, crewed by warriors who had conquered 7-star systems in the past decade. By his calculations, even if every human vessel fought to the death, the campaign would be over within months. His intelligence officers had provided detailed assessments of human military capability. Their fleet was small and had seen no major combat in 2 centuries. Their colonies were lightly defended, and their industrial capacity was focused on civilian rather than military production. Most importantly, humans had grown accustomed to resolving conflicts through negotiation rather than force. Zethrin clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. The humans would either surrender, as any rational species would, or they would provide his forces with some light combat training before inevitable victory. Either outcome would strengthen the hegemony's position in the galaxy and serve as a warning to any other species that might consider resisting the natural order. He had studied the historical records of the Silence Wars, of course, but that had been 2 centuries ago against opponents who are now defunct. The humans of today were traitors and diplomats, not the warriors their ancestors had been. Evolution favored those who adapted to their environment, and the human environment for the past 2 centuries had required cooperation, not conquest. As he prepared to settle in for what he expected to be a routine waiting period before human capitulation, Zethrin's intelligence officer approached with a report. The humans were mobilizing their fleet and calling up reserves. Interesting, but not unexpected. Even a surrender would require some show of military preparation for domestic political purposes. What he didn't know was that deep in the archives of human space, automated systems had just finished compiling a comprehensive database of every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine, and every hard-learned lesson from humanity's most violent period. The files were being distributed to fleet commanders who had spent their entire careers hoping they would never need such knowledge. The hegemony had given humans 72 hours to decide their fate. In doing so, they had made the same mistake that 3 previous galactic powers had made during the Silence Wars. They had assumed that humans would be reasonable. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the abandoned ruins of what had once been a great library on Kepler Station, her portable lighting units casting long shadows across walls covered in alien script. The station had been a massive deep space research facility built by the predecessor civilization, abandoned 50,000 years ago for reasons no one had ever been able to determine. Elena had spent the better part of 5 years trying to decode their written language, and she was finally beginning to understand why her work had suddenly become the most important archaeological project in human space. The inscriptions she was studying weren't just historical records, they were warnings. Her field assistant, a young Kelvani named Zix, whose natural bioluminescence helped illuminate the darker sections of the ruins, approached carrying a portable scanner. The Kelvani's gill slits fluttered with excitement, a sure sign that he had discovered something significant. Dr. Vasquez, Zix said in his melodic voice, the quantum resonance patterns in Section 7 are identical to what we found in the central chamber. The same message, repeated in 17 different locations throughout the facility. Elena nodded grimly. She had expected as much. When a civilization repeated the same message 17 times in their most important archive facility, it wasn't because they were being thorough. It was because they desperately wanted someone to understand what they were trying to say. "Show me the latest translation matrix," she said, pulling up her portable workstation. The holographic display materialized between them, showing the complex alien glyphs alongside Elena's painstaking translation. The predecessor language was unlike anything she had encountered in her career. It wasn't just written communication. It was a multidimensional system that incorporated temporal references, probability matrices, and what appeared to be some form of quantum entanglement encoding. When the Dominators return, Elena read aloud, "The children of the third spiral must remember the truth of resistance. Those who bend will break. Those who yield will be consumed. Only the unbending survive the storm of empires." Zix's bioluminescence dimmed to a worried blue-green. The temporal markers suggest this was written during their final period, correct? Just before their civilization disappeared. Yes, Elena confirmed. But here's what's really interesting. Look at the quantum probability matrices embedded in the text. She manipulated the display, revealing hidden layers of meaning that had been encoded into the very structure of the writing. The predecessors hadn't just been leaving a warning for future generations. They had been making predictions based on what appeared to be an incredibly sophisticated understanding of galactic historical patterns. The pattern repeats across the cycles. Elena continued translating. The Dominators rise from the spiral's edge, demanding submission from the scattered children. Most comply, most perish, but always in the third cycle of each spiral age, the unbending emerge. They are few, but they remember what submission costs. They choose the harder path, and in choosing, they break the cycle. Elena's communicator chimed with an urgent message from Ambassador Chun. She accepted the connection, and Sarah's face appeared in the hologram, stress evident in every line of her expression. "Elena, please tell me you have something that can help us," Sarah said without preamble. "The hegemony's ultimatum expires in 48 hours, and our military assessment isn't optimistic." "I have something," Elena replied, "but I'm not sure you're going to like what it means." Sarah, the predecessors weren't just advanced. They were part of a cyclical pattern that's been repeating across the galaxy for hundreds of thousands of years. She transmitted her translation files to Sarah's secure system, watching as the ambassador's expression grew more troubled with each line she read. "They're talking about us, aren't they?" Sarah said quietly. "The children of the third spiral, that's humanity. Homo sapiens evolved in what the predecessors called the third spiral arm of the galaxy," Elena confirmed. "But that's not the important part. Look at the probability matrices embedded in the warning." Sarah's eyes widened as she processed the implications. They're describing a pattern of galactic conquest that repeats every 50 to 70,000 years. A dominant species emerges from the outer rim, demands submission from established civilizations, and gradually takes control of most of the galaxy. Until they encounter what the predecessors called the unbending, Elena added, a species that refuses to submit, regardless of the cost. The mathematical models suggest that the appearance of an unbending species inevitably leads to the collapse of the dominating empire, but usually at the cost of significant galactic destruction. Zix's bioluminescence shifted to a deep red, the Kelvani equivalent of profound concern. "Dr. Vasquez, if this pattern has repeated multiple times, what happened to the previous unbending species?" Elena was quiet for a moment, studying the final sections of the predecessor warning. They survived, but they were forever changed by the experience. The text suggests that the act of resistance against overwhelming odds transforms a species at a fundamental level. They become something different, something that the galaxy both fears and depends upon. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "The Silence Wars," she said suddenly. "When we fought the Triumvirate Alliance 200 years ago, we were following this pattern, weren't we?" "The timing matches perfectly," Elena confirmed. "And look at what happened afterward. The Triumvirate collapsed. The galaxy reorganized itself into smaller, more cooperative political entities, and humans became the de facto protectors of refugee species and minor civilizations. Because other species recognized that we were the unbending," Sarah realized. "They didn't ally with us out of friendship. They allied with us because they knew what would happen if they tried to dominate us." Elena nodded. "But that's not the most important part of the warning. The predecessors were very specific about the conditions that trigger the cycle's repetition. It happens when a new dominant species emerges and attempt to impose what they call the natural hierarchy on established civilizations. The Xerian hegemony, Sarah said grimly. Their expansion pattern, their ideology about species hierarchy, their timing, everything matches the predecessor predictions exactly. But here's what's really disturbing. The hegemony isn't acting on their own initiative. Elena manipulated her display to show a section of the inscription that had taken her months to decode. The glyphs were more complex here, incorporating what appeared to be genetic and technological signatures. The predecessors identified what they called the dominator gene, a combination of biological and technological factors that appears in certain species when galactic civilization reaches a specific level of complexity. It's not conscious evolution. It's more like a galactic immune response to stagnation. You're saying the hegemony can't help being what they are? Sarah asked. No more than humans can help being unbending, Elena replied. The pattern is bigger than individual choice. But that doesn't mean the outcome is predetermined. The predecessors were very clear about one thing. The unbending species always has the power to break the cycle, but only if they fully embrace what they are. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the alien text that had predicted humanity's current situation with terrifying accuracy. What happened to the predecessors themselves? If they understood the patterns so well, why did their civilization disappear? Elena's expression grew troubled. That's the part one haven't been able to fully translate yet. But the fragments I can read suggest they made a choice. They chose to break the cycle by removing themselves from it entirely. They destroyed themselves? Not destroyed, transformed. The text refers to something called the Great Stepping Back, where they voluntarily abandoned physical existence to become what they called watchers of the pattern. The final inscription suggests they're still out there somewhere, observing each repetition of the cycle. Zix's bioluminescence brightened suddenly. Dr. Vasquez, if the predecessors are still observing, could they be contacted? Elena shook her head. The inscriptions make it clear that the Watchers cannot interfere directly. Each species must face the choice themselves, bend or remain unbending, submit or resist, accept the hierarchy or reject it entirely. Sarah's communicator chimed with an incoming priority message. Admiral Okafor's face appeared alongside Elena's transmission. Ambassador, the Admiral reported, we've just received intelligence that changes everything. The Hegemony fleet isn't just massing at our borders. They've issued similar ultimatums to 12 other species across the galaxy. This isn't just about conquering human space. They're launching a coordinated campaign to establish dominance over every major civilization in the galaxy. The pattern continues, Elena said quietly. The Dominators never target just one species. They systematically work to establish what they believe is the proper galactic hierarchy. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How many of the other species are likely to resist? Initial intelligence suggests most will negotiate some form of accommodation, Okafor replied. The Altarian Republic is already discussing territorial concessions. The Vegan Commonwealth has offered to mediate on behalf of the hegemony. Even the Mekhani's collective is calculating the probability of successful resistance versus submission. Which means we're likely to face this alone, Sarah realized. Just as the pattern predicts, Elena confirmed. The unbending species always stands alone initially. The others only join the resistance after they see that successful opposition is possible. Sarah made her decision. Elena, I need you to transmit every fragment of this translation to Fleet Command immediately. If we're going to fulfill our role as the unbending species, our commanders need to understand what they're really fighting for. There's one more thing, Elena said hesitantly. The predecessor warnings include tactical advice for the unbending species. They're very specific about the psychological and strategic vulnerabilities of Dominator civilizations. Show me, Sarah demanded. Elena transmitted another section of the translation, and Sarah found herself reading what amounted to an ancient military manual for resisting galactic conquest. The Dominators believe in hierarchy because they fear chaos, she read. They seek submission because they cannot comprehend willing sacrifice. They demand order because they have never learned to embrace the impossible. The unbending succeed not through superior force, but through actions the dominators cannot predict or understand. Admiral Okafor leaned forward intently. That's remarkably similar to the tactical doctrines we developed during the Silence Wars. Asymmetric warfare, unpredictable engagement patterns, strategic sacrifice to achieve tactical advantage. Because humans instinctively understand what it means to be unbending, Elena replied. We've been following this pattern since before we knew it existed. Sarah stood and walked to her office viewport, looking out at the peaceful scene of New Geneva habitat. Children were playing in the parks, families were sharing meals together, and representatives from dozens of species were conducting their daily business in an atmosphere of mutual cooperation. It was a scene that would be impossible under hegemony rule, where each species would be assigned their proper place in the hierarchy and forbidden from rising above their designated station. Admiral, what's our current military readiness? She asked. Better than I expected, Okafor admitted. The reserve activation has been more successful than projected. Apparently, 2 centuries of peace didn't make humans forget how to fight. It just made us better at preparing for war efficiently. And the allied species? Even better news there. The Threnodidae have completed their adaptation of crystalline technology for military applications. The Kelvani manufacturing guilds have retooled their entire production capacity for warship components. Even the Osiran civilian pilots are volunteering for combat missions. Sarah smiled grimly. They understand what's at stake better than most humans do. They know what it's like to live under the kind of hierarchy the hegemony wants to establish. Elena's voice drew her attention back to the communication. Ambassador, there's one final section of the predecessor warning that I think you need to see. The alien text appeared on the display, and Sarah read the translation with growing amazement. The unbending will be offered chances to compromise, to accept partial submission in exchange for survival. They will be tempted to save themselves through accommodation. This is the greatest test, not the willingness to fight impossible battles, but the refusal to accept reasonable surrender. They're warning us that the hegemony will offer us a deal, Sarah realized. A deal that might seem reasonable, Elena confirmed. Partial autonomy in exchange for accepting their authority. Protection for human colonies in exchange for abandoning the refugee species. Survival in exchange for giving up everything that makes humans who we are. Admiral Okafor's expression hardened. And if we accept any compromise, we cease to be the unbending species. Which means the pattern continues. The hegemony establishes galactic dominance, and billions of beings spend the next 50,000 years living under a hierarchy they never chose, Elena concluded. Sarah returned to her desk and began composing a message that would be transmitted to every human colony, every refugee community, and every allied species in human space. To all those who have chosen to stand with humanity, she began, we have learned that our current crisis is part of a pattern that has repeated across the galaxy for hundreds of thousands of years. We are not the first to face this choice, and we will not be the last. But we're the first in this galactic age to be offered the chance to break the pattern permanently. She paused, thinking about her daughter, her unborn grandchild, and the billions of beings whose futures will be determined by the decisions made in the next 48 hours. The Xerian hegemony believes they represent the natural order of the galaxy, that some species are born to rule while others are born to serve. They will offer us compromises, partial accommodations, reasonable surrenders that might preserve human civilization at the cost of our principles. I want everyone to understand that we will not accept any such offers. As she prepared to send the message, Sarah reflected on Elena's discovery. The predecessors had tried to warn future civilizations about the choice they would face. They had provided tactical advice, historical context, and mathematical predictions about the consequences of different decisions. But in the end, they had made it clear that each species must choose for themselves. The choice was simple, even if the consequences were not. Bend or remain unbending, submit or resist, accept the hierarchy, or reject it entirely. Humanity had made this choice before, during the Silence Wars, though they hadn't understood the full implications at the time. Now they understood exactly what they were choosing and what it would cost. Across human space, the message was received and understood. On colony worlds, civilian populations began preparing for siege conditions. In the asteroid belt mining stations, where haulers were being retrofitted with weapons and armor. On the outer rim, scout ships began implementing deep reconnaissance protocols that hadn't been used since the last Great War. The refugee communities responded with even greater determination. They had fled the hegemony's vision of galactic order once before. Now, they were being offered the chance to help destroy it permanently. But, perhaps most significantly, the message was intercepted by intelligence services throughout the galaxy. The major civilizations who had been preparing to accommodate the hegemony suddenly realized that humanity intended to fight regardless of the odds. The mathematical certainty of hegemony victory was no longer quite so certain. In the deep archives of human military history, tactical computers finished their analysis of predecessor strategic doctrine and began integrating ancient alien wisdom with uniquely human approaches to warfare. The result was something that had never existed before, a complete understanding of how to fight and win against an apparently superior force. High Executor Zethrin received reports of human mobilization with satisfaction. The humans were posturing for their domestic population, but they would ultimately see reason. Even if they chose to resist initially, a few devastating defeats would bring them to the negotiation table. What he didn't understand was that humans had already decided there would be no negotiation table. The predecessors had warned that the greatest test for the unbending species was not the willingness to fight impossible battles, but the refusal to accept reasonable surrender. Humanity had just publicly announced that they would accept no surrender at all. The countdown to the hegemony's ultimatum continued, but it was no longer counting down to humanity's submission. It was counting down to the moment when the galaxy would discover whether the ancient pattern could finally be broken and whether the price of freedom was something that humans were prepared to pay in full. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance, watching the tactical display that showed the Xerian hegemony's massive fleet in perfect formation just beyond the edge of human space. 1,200 capital ships arranged in the geometric patterns that hegemony military doctrine demanded, beautiful, precise, and utterly predictable. After 30 years of service in the human colonial fleet, Marcus had learned to recognize when an enemy was fighting the last war instead of the current one. Time remaining on their ultimatum, he asked his tactical officer. 14 hours, 17 minutes, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim replied. Her fingers danced across her console, updating the firing solutions for weapons that the hegemony probably didn't even know existed. All squadrons report ready for Operation Mongoose. Marcus smiled grimly at the operation name. 200 years ago, a mongoose had been a small, seemingly harmless creature that specialized in killing much larger and more dangerous snakes. The comparison seemed appropriate. Signal from Admiral Chun, his communications officer, reported. All fleet commanders, priority Alpha. The bridge's main display activated, showing Admiral Lisa Chun, Ambassador Sarah Chen's daughter, addressing the combined human fleet from her flagship. Lisa had been born during the peace years, but she had studied the Silence Wars with the intensity of someone who knew she might someday have to fight them again. Captains, Admiral Chen began. The hegemony ultimatum expires in 14 hours. Intelligence reports suggest they expect either our surrender or a conventional defensive engagement. They're about to learn that humans don't do conventional. Marcus exchanged glances with his bridge crew. They had spent the past 72 hours implementing tactical doctrines that had been classified since the end of the Silence Wars. The hegemony's intelligence services had excellent data on human defensive capabilities, fleet strength, and conventional tactics. What they didn't have was any information about what humans did when conventional tactics weren't enough. Operation Mongoose is a go, Admiral Chen continued. All task forces have their assignments. Remember, we're not trying to defeat their entire fleet in direct engagement. We're trying to make them understand that conquest of human space will cost more than they're prepared to pay." The transmission ended, and Marcus turned to his crew. The Defiance was a modified exploration vessel that had been retrofitted with some very unconventional equipment over the past 3 days. On paper, she was massively outgunned by any ship in the hegemony fleet. In practice, she was about to demonstrate why humans had survived every attempt at galactic conquest for the past 2 centuries. "All stations prepare for quantum jump," Marcus ordered. "Navigation, execute pre-programmed Sequence 7 Alpha." The Defiance vanished from her position in the human fleet and reappeared 30,000 kilometers behind the hegemony formation. According to conventional military doctrine, this was a suicide mission. A single light cruiser attacking the rear of a formation of capital ships would be destroyed within minutes. But the Defiance wasn't equipped for conventional warfare. "Target the hegemony command ship," Marcus ordered. "Activate the Threnody package." Lieutenant Commander Kim's console lit up with crystalline interfaces that hadn't existed 72 hours ago. The Threnody refugees had spent decades developing quantum entanglement communication systems for civilian use. It had taken them less than 3 days to adapt the technology for military applications that violated several galactic warfare conventions. High Executor Zethran was reviewing final preparations for the human conquest when his flagship's defensive screens began failing. Not from weapons fire. There had been no attack, but from what appeared to be systematic quantum interference with his ship's basic systems. "Report," he demanded, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "Unknown quantum signatures throughout the fleet," his tactical officer reported, her voice betraying confusion. "All ships are experiencing cascading system failures. Our defensive screens are collapsing, but there's no indication of conventional weapons fire." "Impossible," Zethran declared. "No species in the galaxy has quantum warfare capabilities beyond theoretical research." His intelligence officer approached with a datapad, his exoskeleton pale with shock. "High Executor, we're detecting a single human vessel 30,000 kilometers behind our formation. Registry identifies it as UHS Defiance, an exploration-class vessel with minimal armament. One ship is causing fleet-wide system failures." Zethran's voice carried dangerous harmonics. "It appears they've weaponized Threnody quantum entanglement technology," the intelligence officer replied. "Our databases show no record of successful military applications of such systems." On the bridge of the Defiance, Marcus watched as the hegemony fleet began to understand what was happening to them. Effectiveness of the quantum interference package. 70% of their capital ships are experiencing significant system degradation, Kim reported. Their command and control networks are completely disrupted. However, the interference is symmetrical. We can't maintain it indefinitely without damaging our own systems. "We don't need indefinitely," Marcus replied. "Signal the rest of Task Force 7. Execute Phase 2. Across the hegemony formation, space began to distort in patterns that no military force in galactic history had ever seen. Human ships appeared and disappeared in quantum flashes, never staying in one location long enough to be targeted effectively. Each time they appeared, they delivered precise attacks on specific systems, sensor arrays, communication relays, quantum drive motivators, before vanishing again. But the most disturbing development for the hegemony commanders was that the humans weren't trying to destroy their ships. They were systematically dismantling their ability to function as a coordinated fleet while leaving the vessels themselves largely intact. "This is not conventional warfare," Zethran observed, watching his tactical display fragment into chaos as ship after ship lost the ability to coordinate with fleet command. What are they attempting to accomplish? His question was answered when every functioning communication system in the hegemony fleet received a simultaneous transmission from Admiral Chen. "High Executor Zethran," she began, "you offered humanity 72 hours to surrender our freedom and abandon those who have sought sanctuary among us. We have considered your offer carefully, and we must respectfully decline. The image of Admiral Chun was replaced by a tactical overview showing the current state of the hegemony fleet. Hundreds of ships were drifting powerless, their crews unharmed, but their vessels reduced to expensive life support systems. The remaining functional ships were scattered across several light hours of space, unable to coordinate their movements or concentrate their firepower effectively. As you can see, Admiral Chen's voice continued, your fleet is no longer capable of coordinated offensive operations. This was accomplished by 37 human vessels, supported by technology freely shared by species you consider inferior to your own. We could have destroyed your entire force, but we chose not to. Marcus watched Zethran's command ship struggle to restore power to its main systems. The hegemony had brought 1,200 capital ships to intimidate humanity into submission. Instead, they had just discovered that their entire military doctrine was obsolete. You have two choices, Admiral Chen announced. You may order your fleet to withdraw beyond a neutral zone and reconsider your approach to galactic politics. Or you may attempt to continue your conquest campaign with the understanding that every engagement will follow similar patterns. The transmission ended, leaving the hegemony fleet to contemplate their situation. They had come to impose their vision of galactic order through overwhelming force. Instead, they had become the subjects of a demonstration that their concept of overwhelming force was no longer relevant. But High Executor Zethran had not conquered seven-star systems by accepting defeat easily. As his engineering teams worked frantically to restore his ship's systems, he considered the implications of what the humans had accomplished. They had demonstrated superior technology, but they had also revealed that technology to his intelligence services. The quantum interference effects could be analyzed, understood, and eventually countered. More importantly, the humans had shown restraint. They had disabled rather than destroyed, which suggested they were not prepared for total war. Fleet communications, all functional vessels, Zethran ordered as his primary systems came back online. Reform at Rally Point 7. Engineering assessment of human quantum interference systems, Priority Alpha. Intelligence analysis of human tactical doctrine, immediate distribution to all ship commanders. His mandibles clicked with renewed confidence. The humans believe they have demonstrated our weakness. Instead, they have revealed their own reluctance to press their advantage. We will adapt our tactics and resume operations within 6 standard hours. What Zethran didn't understand was that Admiral Chun had predicted his exact response. The predecessors had been very specific about the psychology of dominator species. They interpreted restraint as weakness, tactical demonstrations as full displays of capability, and strategic patience as a lack of resolve. Humanity's first strike had not been designed to defeat the hegemony fleet. It had been designed to make them reveal their true intentions and their strategic limitations. The real battle was about to begin. On the bridge of the UHS Determination, Admiral Chun received a report from all task forces engaged in Operation Mongoose. The results were better than projected. The hegemony fleet was effectively neutralized for the next several hours, and their response patterns were exactly what human tactical computers had predicted. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we're receiving signals from hegemony Rally Point 7. They're attempting to regroup their functional vessels. Predicted timeline for their counterattack? Chen asked. Computer models suggest 4 to 6 hours for partial fleet coordination, 12 to 14 hours for full tactical capability, her tactical officer replied. Admiral Chen nodded. The hegemony's response was proceeding exactly according to predecessor strategic analysis. They would adapt their technology to counter human quantum interference systems, modify their tactics to account for human mobility advantages, and launch a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm human defenses through sheer numerical superiority. It was exactly what they were supposed to do. Signal all task forces, Chun ordered. Phase 3 is authorized. Begin Operation Termite. Across human space, a different kind of mobilization began. While the hegemony worked to restore their fleet's combat effectiveness, human engineering teams implemented the second phase of their strategic response. If the first strike had been designed to demonstrate human capabilities, the second phase was designed to make the hegemony understand the true cost of their conquest campaign. Captain Elena Vasquez, Dr. Elena Vasquez's sister and commander of the UHS Archaeology, received her orders while conducting deep reconnaissance beyond the neutral zone. Her modified science vessel had spent the past 72 hours mapping hegemony supply lines, logistics networks, and rear area installations. Navigation, plot a course for Hegemony Logistics Depot 77 Alpha, she ordered. All departments, prepare for extended operations behind enemy lines. The Archaeology was one of 40 human vessels tasked with implementing what the Silence Wars veterans had called strategic interdiction. The Hegemony had brought 1,200 warships to conquer human space, but those ships required constant resupply from an extensive network of support facilities. Those support facilities were about to discover that humans fought wars very differently than the hegemony expected. High Executor Zethrin finally restored full fleet communications 6 hours after the human attack. His formation was scattered but functional, and his engineering teams had developed preliminary countermeasures for human quantum interference technology. More importantly, his intelligence analysis had identified what appeared to be critical weaknesses in human tactical doctrine. The humans appeared to lack the resolve for decisive engagement, his chief tactical advisor reported. Their attack was designed to minimize casualties while demonstrating capabilities. This suggests they hope to negotiate from a position of temporary advantage rather than commit to sustained warfare. Zethrin's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Precisely what I had concluded. They have revealed their primary weapons systems in exchange for a temporary tactical victory. We will adapt our defenses and overwhelm their small fleet through concentrated assault. There is one concern, his intelligence officer interjected. Our rear area facilities have lost contact with forward positions. The disruption could indicate human operations beyond the primary engagement zone. Insignificant, Zethrin dismissed. Rear area harassment cannot affect the outcome of fleet engagement. Order all functional vessels to begin concentrated approach toward the human home system. We will end this conflict through direct assault on their primary population centers. What Zethrin didn't realize was that his logistics network was already collapsing. Captain Vasquez and 39 other human commanders were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that kept the hegemony fleet operational. Not through direct attacks on heavily defended facilities, but through precise strikes on the quantum communication nodes, automated supply convoys, and maintenance stations that held the hegemony's extended operations together. The humans weren't trying to destroy the hegemony's rear area facilities. They were turning them into resource drains that would force the hegemony to choose between maintaining their forward offensive and protecting their logistical infrastructure. It was a strategic approach that required the kind of long-term thinking that dominator species, according to predecessor analysis, were psychologically incapable of maintaining. The hegemony would continue their advance toward human population centers because their military doctrine demanded decisive engagement. In doing so, they would stretch their supply lines beyond their ability to maintain, while human forces systematically eliminated their capacity for sustained operations. Admiral Chun received updates from Operation Termite with growing satisfaction. The hegemony was responding exactly as predicted. They were interpreting strategic complexity as tactical weakness, and they were committing their entire fleet to a direct assault that would inevitably fail once their logistical support collapsed. But the most important element of the human strategy was yet to be implemented. The first 2 phases had been designed to demonstrate human capabilities and force the hegemony to commit to total warfare. The third phase would demonstrate what happened when humans stopped showing restraint. As the hegemony fleet began its final approach toward the human core systems, automated beacons throughout human space began transmitting a simple message to every civilization in the galaxy. The hegemony has chosen war. The pattern ends here. It was a message that the galaxy had been waiting centuries to hear, even if most species didn't realize it yet. The unbending species had been provoked beyond the point of negotiation. What happened next would determine whether the ancient cycle of galactic domination would continue for another 50,000 years, or whether it would finally be broken permanently. The hegemony fleet pressed forward, confident in their numerical superiority and adapted tactics. Behind them, their supply lines crumbled. Ahead of them, humanity prepared to demonstrate why they had never lost a war when their survival was at stake. The real battle was about to begin. The battle for the Sol system began not with the thunder of massive fleets clashing in the void, but with silence. Admiral Lisa Chun watched from the bridge of her flagship as the hegemony's reformed fleet approached the outer edge of humanity's home system, their formation reduced but still formidable. 800 capital ships had survived the quantum interference attacks and subsequent regrouping, and High Executive Zethran had clearly learned from his initial encounter with human tactical doctrine. "They've adapted faster than our projections suggested," reported Captain Sarah Kim, now serving as Chin's tactical coordinator. "New formation patterns suggest they've developed countermeasures for our quantum interference systems." Chin nodded, studying the enemy approach vectors on her tactical display. "Intelligence assessment of their modifications? Significant, but incomplete," Kim replied. "They've hardened their communication networks and developed isolation protocols for their key systems. However, the modifications appear to be rushed. They've traded operational flexibility for protection against our quantum weapons, which means they're fighting the last battle instead of the current one," Chin observed. It was exactly what the predecessor warnings had predicted about dominator psychology. They adapted to known threats while remaining blind to new ones. The hegemony fleet had spent 6 days rebuilding their tactical doctrine around countering human quantum interference technology. What they hadn't realized was that the quantum attacks had never been humanity's primary weapon. They had been a strategic deception designed to make the hegemony focus on the wrong problem, while their real vulnerabilities were systematically exploited. "Signal from the outer defense perimeter," Chin's communications officer announced. "Captain Rodriguez reports Operation Patience is ready for implementation." Chin smiled grimly. Operation Patience had been named after another lesson from the Silence Wars. Sometimes the most effective weapon against a superior enemy was simply letting them defeat themselves. High Executive Zethran stood on his command bridge, surveying the approach to humanity's home system with satisfaction. The humans had withdrawn their scattered forces to defensive positions around their primary planets, exactly as conventional military doctrine dictated. After the initial shock of their unconventional tactics, they appeared to have reverted to predictable defensive strategies. "Fleet status report," he commanded. 812 capital ships operational, his tactical officer replied. "All vessels have implemented quantum interference countermeasures. Forward scouts report human defensive positions around the inner planets, but no significant force concentration. They're protecting their population centers," Zethran concluded. "Standard defensive posture for a numerically inferior force. We will proceed with concentrated assault on their primary military installations." What Zethran didn't realize was that the human defensive positions his scouts had detected were largely automated decoys, while the actual human fleet was implementing a strategy that had never been attempted in galactic warfare history. Rather than trying to protect their territory through defensive engagement, humanity had chosen to demonstrate that their territory was no longer relevant to the outcome of the war. Captain Marcus Rodriguez sat in the command center of Mining Station Omega-7, deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The station had been hastily converted from civilian operations to serve as the coordination hub for what human planners were calling the impossible strategy. Around him, holographic displays showed the real-time status of human operations not just within the Sol system, but across a volume of space encompassing 47 star systems. Phase 4 assets report ready, his operations coordinator announced. All task forces have reached their designated positions. Rodriguez studied the tactical overview that showed the true scope of humanity's response to the hegemony ultimatum. While Zethran's attention was focused on the approaching battle for Sol, 300 human vessels were implementing simultaneous operations across the entire sphere of hegemony influence. It was a strategic gambit that violated every principle of military concentration of force, but it was also the only approach that could achieve humanity's actual objective. They weren't trying to defeat the hegemony fleet in direct combat. They were trying to collapse the hegemony itself. Execute Phase 4, Rodriguez ordered. All task forces begin implementation of the impossible. Across the galaxy, human forces began what would later be remembered as the most audacious military campaign in recorded history. Instead of defending their own territory, they had chosen to simultaneously attack every critical installation that kept the hegemony functioning as a coherent political entity. Captain Elena Vasquez, operating deep in hegemony core space, received the execution order while her vessel lurked in the shadow of Xerion Prime's outer moon. The hegemony homeworld was the administrative center of an empire spanning 12 star systems, protected by massive defensive installations and constant patrol fleets. It was also completely unprepared for the kind of attack humanity was about to launch. All departments initiate Scorpion Protocol, Vasquez ordered. Her science vessel had been extensively modified over the past week, carrying equipment that technically violated several galactic warfare conventions. More importantly, it carried technology that the hegemony had never encountered and couldn't counter. The UHS Archaeology began broadcasting what appeared to be a standard distress signal on all emergency frequencies. Within minutes, hegemony patrol vessels were converging on her position, following protocols that demanded they investigate potential rescue situations even during wartime. What they found was a human vessel that appeared to be suffering catastrophic system failures, drifting helplessly with life support systems barely functional. It was exactly the kind of situation that galactic warfare conventions require them to address through humanitarian assistance, regardless of the broader military situation. It was also a trap that exploited the hegemony's rigid adherence to their own legal frameworks. As soon as the first hegemony rescue vessel docked with the archaeology, Captain Vasquez activated the Threnodai-designed quantum virus that her ship had been carrying. The virus wasn't designed to damage hegemony systems. It was designed to make them function exactly as programmed, but with one critical modification. Every hegemony vessel and installation that was infected would continue operating normally while simultaneously broadcasting their complete operational status to human intelligence networks. The hegemony would maintain full functionality while unknowingly providing humanity with real-time intelligence on every aspect of their military and administrative operations. Within hours, the quantum virus had propagated through the hegemony's entire communication network. Their fleet commanders continued issuing orders, their logistics coordinators maintained supply schedules, and their administrative centers processed routine governance functions. They just did it all while providing humanity with complete situational awareness of their empire's internal operations. High Executor Zethrin launched his assault on the Sol system's outer defenses with confidence that his adapted tactics would overwhelm human resistance. His fleet had been divided into 3 assault groups, each targeting a different cluster of human installations. The attack proceeded exactly according to plan for the first 6 hours. The human defensive positions offered determined, but ultimately futile resistance. Their quantum interference weapons proved ineffective against hegemony countermeasures, and their mobile tactics couldn't compensate for the numerical superiority of the attacking fleet. One by one, the human defensive installations were destroyed or abandoned. Zethrin's mandibles clicked with satisfaction as his forces established control over the outer system. Human resistance is collapsing as predicted, he announced to his fleet commanders. Prepare for final assault on their primary population centers. His tactical officer approached with what should have been a routine status update. High Executor, we're receiving priority communications from the home territories. Administrative matters can wait until after the conquest, Zethrin replied dismissively. Sir, the communications are from the Planetary Defense Command. They report human vessels conducting operations throughout core space. Zethran turned to face his officer, mandibles stilling with sudden concern. Impossible. All human vessels are accounted for in this system. The reports indicate at least 40 human vessels have been detected conducting operations in sectors 7 through 15. Additionally, our logistics network is reporting significant disruptions to supply operations. For the first time since the campaign began, Zethran felt a touch of uncertainty. Display the tactical overview of our home territories. The holographic display materialized, showing a three-dimensional map of hegemony space that was marked with hundreds of red indicators representing reported human activities. As Zethran watched, more indicators appeared in real time, spreading across the map like a contagion. "This is impossible," he stated. "Human forces lack the numerical strength for simultaneous operations across multiple star systems." His intelligence officer approached with a datapad, her exoskeleton pale with stress. "High Executor, the pattern of human operations suggests they're not attempting to hold territory or engage our defensive forces directly. They appear to be targeting specific categories of infrastructure." Explain. "Communication relays, automated supply, convoys, administrative data centers, and civilian transportation networks. They're systematically dismantling our ability to coordinate Imperial operations without engaging our military forces." Zethran studied the display with growing alarm. The humans weren't trying to conquer hegemony territory. They were trying to make it unconquerable by anyone, including the hegemony itself. "Recall the 7th and 9th fleets from their forward positions," ordered. "All available vessels are to return to core space immediately." "Sir," his tactical officer interjected, "that will leave us with insufficient forces to complete the conquest of human territory. There will be no territory to conquer if we lose control of our own empire," Zethran replied grimly. Admiral Chun received reports of the hegemony fleet's partial withdrawal with satisfaction. "Phase 5 is authorized," she announced. "All task forces implement final demonstration." What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries. Instead of pursuing the retreating hegemony vessels or attempting to defend the Sol System's inner planets, humanity launched the most psychologically devastating attack in galactic warfare history. They invaded the hegemony home system, not with a massive fleet. They didn't have one. Not with superior technology. They were still technologically inferior in most respects. They invaded with 12 vessels carrying a message that would shatter the fundamental assumptions underlying hegemony political philosophy. Captain Rodriguez led the human task force that emerged from quantum space directly above Zerion Prime. His modified exploration vessel was accompanied by 11 other ships of various sizes and configurations, none of which would have been considered significant threats under normal circumstances. But circumstances were no longer normal. Broadcasting on all frequencies, Rodriguez announced to his fleet, "Citizens of the Zerion hegemony, this is Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Alliance. We are here to deliver a message from our governments to yours." The message that followed was transmitted simultaneously to every communication network in the hegemony empire, carried by the quantum virus that had infected their entire infrastructure. "For the past 2 weeks, you have attempted to impose your vision of galactic order through military conquest. You have demanded the surrender of our freedom and the abandonment of those who sought sanctuary among us. You believe that superior numbers would guarantee your success." Rodriguez paused, watching as hegemony defensive forces scrambled to respond to the unprecedented situation of enemy vessels broadcasting from orbit around their capital world. "You were wrong. At this moment, human forces are operating in 47 of your star systems. Your supply lines have been disrupted, your communication networks have been compromised, and your administrative infrastructure has been systematically neutralized. We have accomplished this not through superior numbers, but through superior understanding of what this conflict is really about." The transmission switched to a tactical overview showing the true scope of human operations across hegemony space. Red indicators marked hundreds of installations that had been disabled, supply routes that had been interdicted, and administrative centers that have been isolated from their command networks. This war was never about human territory or hegemony expansion, Rodriguez continued. It was about whether the galaxy would accept your vision of hierarchical order or whether it would choose something different. Today, the galaxy has its answer. As if choreographed across the entire galactic community, the responses began arriving. The Altarian Republic announced that they were withdrawing from all treaties with the hegemony. The Vegan Commonwealth declared their neutrality no longer neutral and began mobilizing their own fleets. Even the Mechanis Collective, which had remained algorithmically impartial throughout the conflict, issued a statement that hegemony conquest probability had dropped below acceptable parameters. But the most significant response came from a species that had been living under hegemony rule in the conquered territories. Inspired by humanity's demonstration that resistance was possible, they began their own uprisings against hegemony authority. High Executor Zethrin found himself facing a situation that no hegemony leader had ever encountered: simultaneous rebellion across multiple systems, combined with external military pressure and the complete collapse of his empire's administrative coordination. Status report from all sectors, he demanded. Sector 7 reports civilian uprising on 3 planets, his communications officer replied. Sector 12 has lost contact with the administrative center. Sectors 15 through 21 are requesting immediate military assistance to maintain order. And our fleet strength. Approximately 400 vessels remain in the home system. The rest are scattered across our territories, attempting to maintain control of rebellious populations. Zethrin realized that he was facing a strategic situation that hegemony doctrine had never anticipated. They had planned for military conquest through superior force. They had prepared for defensive operations against external threats. They had never considered the possibility of simultaneous internal collapse combined with external pressure from a numerically inferior opponent. Open a communication channel to the human commander, he ordered. Captain Rodriguez received the hegemony communication request while his small fleet maintained orbit around Zerion Prime. High Executor Zethrin, he acknowledged as the alien leader's image appeared on his bridge display. Captain Rodriguez, Zethrin began, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled agitation. I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding of our intentions. The hegemony seeks only to establish proper order in chaotic regions of the galaxy. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation. Rodriguez smiled grimly. The predecessors had predicted this moment exactly. When the dominator species finally offered to negotiate, it would be because they had finally understood the true cost of their chosen path. High Executor, Rodriguez replied, there is no misunderstanding. You offered humanity a choice between submission and destruction. We chose a third option. The question now is what choice you will make. What do you mean? You can continue attempting to maintain your empire through force, knowing that every day of continued conflict will further destabilize your ability to govern. Or you can accept that the age of galactic hierarchies is over and begin the process of transforming your territories into something that your people might actually choose to be part of. Zethrin's exoskeleton paled as he grasped the full implications of humanity's strategy. They hadn't just attacked his military forces. They had systematically dismantled the entire concept of imposed political order. The hegemony could no longer rule through force because their subject populations had seen that resistance was possible. They could no longer expand through conquest because the galaxy now understood what such expansion would cost. Most critically, they could no longer maintain their ideology of hierarchical superiority because a supposedly inferior species had just demonstrated complete strategic dominance without firing a shot at civilian populations. What are your terms? Zethrin asked quietly. We don't have terms, Rodriguez replied. We have expectations. End your conquest campaigns. Release your subject populations to choose their own governments. Transform your military from a tool of oppression into a force for protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Do these things, and humanity will help you rebuild your civilization into something worthy of the galaxy's respect. And if we refuse? Rodriguez's expression hardened. Then you will discover that everything we've done so far has been a demonstration of restraint. Humanity has never lost a war when our survival was at stake. But, more importantly, you will discover that you're no longer facing just humanity. You are facing every species in the galaxy that has decided they prefer freedom to hierarchy. As if to emphasize his point, sensor readings began showing ships emerging from quantum space throughout the Zirian system. Not human ships, but vessels from dozens of species that had remained neutral throughout the conflict. The Altarian Republic, the Vegan Commonwealth, the Mekhani's Collective, and even species that the hegemony had never heard of, all arriving to witness the end of the last great galactic empire. High Executor Zethrin found himself facing a choice that no leader of a species had ever confronted: evolve or become extinct. The age of imposed galactic order was ending. The question was whether it would end through transformation or through the complete collapse of everything the hegemony had built. Humanity had broken the ancient pattern. Now the galaxy had to decide what would replace it. 5 years after the hegemony war, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood once again at the observation deck of the Human Diplomatic Corps building on New Geneva Habitat, but the view had changed dramatically. The crystalline spires still reached toward the artificial sky, but now they were joined by architectural styles from 43 different species. What had once been humanity's diplomatic center had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history: the capital of the first truly voluntary interstellar alliance. The communication array on her desk chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Elena Vasquez, who is now serving as director of the Galactic Historical Archive. Elena's face appeared in the hologram, bearing the satisfied expression of someone who had finally completed a decades-long project. "Sarah, I've finished the comprehensive analysis of the predecessor warnings," Elena announced. "The results are even more significant than we originally thought." Sarah activated her privacy shields and settled into her chair. The past 5 years had been a whirlwind of reconstruction, negotiation, and the careful construction of something the galaxy had never seen before. She was eager to understand how their actions fit into the broader pattern of galactic history. "Show me what you found," she said. Elena's expression grew serious as she transmitted her files. The predecessor civilization didn't just predict the rise and fall of galactic empires. They predicted the eventual emergence of what they called the pattern breakers, a species that would end the cycle of domination permanently. The holographic display materialized between them, showing Elena's translation of previously unreadable predecessor inscriptions. The alien glyphs were accompanied by complex mathematical models that had taken years to fully decode. According to their calculations, Elena continued, the pattern breakers would emerge during what they termed the final cycle, when galactic civilization had reached sufficient complexity to support genuine cooperation between species, but when a natural tendency toward hierarchy threatened to lock the galaxy into permanent stagnation. Sarah studied the mathematical projections with growing amazement. They predicted the exact timing of the hegemony war. Not just the timing, the outcome. Look at this section here. Elena highlighted a portion of the alien text. The pattern breakers will not defeat the final dominators through superior force, but through the demonstration that force itself is obsolete as a tool of governance. They will accomplish this not by destroying their enemies, but by making their enemies' goals meaningless. Which is exactly what happened to the hegemony, Sarah realized. The transformation of the Zirian hegemony had been the most remarkable political development of the post-war period. Faced with the complete collapse of their ability to rule through force, they had been forced to fundamentally reimagine what their civilization could become. High Executor Zethrin, now bearing the title of First Representative of the Zirian Commonwealth, had proven surprisingly adaptable to democratic governance. But here's the really significant part, Elena continued. The predecessors predicted that once the pattern breakers emerged, they would trigger what they called the Great Awakening, a period when all galactic civilizations would simultaneously evolve beyond their previous limitations. As if to illustrate Elena's point, Sarah's communication system chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Lisa Chun, now serving as coordinator of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Lisa's image appeared alongside Elena's, her expression carrying news of obvious importance. "Mother, I thought you'd want to hear this immediately," Lisa began. "We just received a message from the Makani's Collective. They're announcing the development of what they're calling consciousness bridging technology, a way for biological and artificial intelligences to fully understand each other's thought processes." Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. During the HFY War, the greatest challenge had been getting different species to cooperate despite fundamental differences in psychology, physiology, and communication methods. Now, apparently, even those barriers were beginning to fall. "There's more," Lisa continued. "The Threnodai have announced a breakthrough in quantum consciousness research that they say will allow individual beings to temporarily share the experiences of others. The Altarian Republic is developing what they call empathic governance systems that incorporate the emotional well-being of all citizens into political decision-making." Elena leaned forward intently. The predecessors described exactly this phenomenon. According to their projections, the end of the domination cycle would trigger a cascade of evolutionary developments across all participating civilizations. Evolutionary developments? Sarah asked. Not biological evolution, consciousness evolution. The ability to truly understand other forms of intelligence, to cooperate at levels that previous generations couldn't even imagine, to solve problems through genuine collaboration rather than compromise between competing interests. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. The past 5 years had felt like a period of remarkable progress, but she had assumed it was simply the natural result of ending a major war. Now Elena was suggesting it was something much more significant. The beginning of a fundamental transformation in how galactic civilization operated. "Elena, what happened to the predecessors after they became the pattern breakers of their era?" Elena's expression grew contemplative. "That's the part I'm still working on. The final inscriptions are incredibly complex, but they seem to suggest that the predecessors didn't disappear. They transcended. They evolved beyond the need for physical existence while maintaining their role as observers and occasional guides for younger civilizations. The Watchers of the Pattern," Sarah remembered. "Exactly. But here's what's really interesting. The mathematical models suggest that the pattern breakers don't just end the domination cycle for their own era. They establish a new pattern that makes domination impossible for all future eras." Admiral Chen's image shifted as she received an incoming priority message. "I'm getting reports from across the galaxy," she announced. "The Vegan Commonwealth is announcing the development of collective decision-making algorithms that ensure minority voices are never overwhelmed by majority preferences. The reformed hegemony territories are implementing what they call voluntary governance structures, where every citizen can choose their level of participation in political processes." Sarah stood and walked to her viewport, looking out at the bustling activity of New Geneva habitat. The sight still amazed her. Beings from dozens of species working together not because they had been forced to, but because they had discovered they were more capable together than apart. A group of human children were playing with Threnodai younglings in one of the parks, their laughter creating harmonics that seemed to resonate with the Threnodai's natural crystalline frequencies. Nearby, a team of Kelvani engineers was collaborating with human architects on what appeared to be plans for a new residential section, their bioluminescent communication patterns creating a light show that drew appreciative attention from passersby. "Elena," Sarah said quietly, "show me the final predecessor prediction about the pattern breakers." Elena manipulated her display to reveal the last section of translated text. The alien glyphs were more complex here, incorporating symbols that seemed to shift and change as Sarah watched them. "When the pattern breakers have completed their work," Elena read, "they will face the greatest choice of all. They may choose to transcend as we have done, becoming watchers for the civilizations that follow. Or they may choose to remain, guiding the galaxy through its transformation into something that has never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic community. If they choose transcendence, The galaxy will prosper, but remain limited by the perspectives of its component species. If they choose to remain, the galaxy will evolve beyond current understanding, becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. The choice cannot be made by logic or calculation. It must be made by the heart of what makes the pattern breakers unique. Sarah felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over her. The predecessors were describing a choice that humanity would eventually face, whether to step beyond physical existence to become guides for future civilizations, or to remain engaged in a messy, complex, but ultimately rewarding work of building something unprecedented. There's one more thing, Elena continued. The predecessors left specific instructions for the pattern breakers. Not orders or commands, but suggestions based on their own experience. Show me. Elena transmitted the final section of her translation, and Sarah found herself reading what amounted to a letter from one species of pattern breakers to another, separated by 50,000 years but united by the same fundamental choice. To those who come after us, who break the patterns we could not break, who achieve what we could only dream of achieving, remember that the greatest strength of the pattern breakers is not their refusal to submit, but their willingness to include. Your enemies will become your allies, not because you defeated them, but because you show them a better way to exist. Do not make our mistake. We chose transcendence because we believe the galaxy would be safer with wise observers than with active participants. We were wrong. The galaxy does not need more watchers. It needs more builders, more dreamers, more species willing to do the hard work of cooperation. Build something we were afraid to build. Create something we couldn't imagine. And when the next cycle begins, when new challenges arise that threaten everything you have built, trust in the same quality that made you pattern breakers, your refusal to accept that any problem is impossible to solve. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she grasped the full significance of what Elena had discovered. The predecessors had tried to warn future civilizations about the domination cycle, but they had also left encouragement for the species that would finally end it. Admiral Chun, Sarah said, addressing her daughter, what's the current status of galactic integration projects? Beyond all projections, Lisa replied. The Galactic Defense Alliance now includes representatives from 87 species, all operating under voluntary cooperation protocols. The Resource Sharing Initiative has eliminated scarcity-based conflicts in 12 star systems. Most significantly, the Consciousness Research Collaborative is reporting breakthroughs that could eventually allow different species to directly share knowledge and experience. And resistance to integration? Minimal and decreasing. The species that initially opposed the new cooperative structures are finding that they benefit more from participation than from isolation. Even the most independently minded civilizations are discovering that voluntary cooperation produces better outcomes than forced self-reliance. Elena leaned forward. Sarah, I think the transformation is accelerating beyond even predecessor predictions. They anticipated that consciousness evolution would take centuries. Instead, it's happening in decades. Sarah returned to her desk and opened a communication channel to the Galactic Council's emergency session protocols. What she was about to propose would be the most significant political initiative since the end of the Hegemony War. To all member species of the Galactic Cooperative Alliance, she began, we have reached a point in our development where we must make a fundamental choice about our future. The old patterns of dominance and submission have been broken, but we have not yet established what will replace them. She paused, thinking about her granddaughter, Lisa's daughter, who was now 3 years old and already playing with children from a dozen different species as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. I propose that we formally establish the galaxy's first truly voluntary civilization, a community of species united not by conquest or treaty, but by shared commitment to each other's growth and well-being. This will require new forms of governance, new approaches to resource distribution, and new methods of resolving conflicts between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, representatives from over 100 species had endorsed the proposal. Even more significantly, they began suggesting improvements and modifications that hadn't occurred to human planners. The Threnodidae proposed quantum consciousness networks that would allow species to share experiential knowledge. The Mechanis Collective offered algorithmic governance systems that could incorporate the decision-making preferences of both biological and artificial intelligences. The reformed hegemony territories suggested rotating leadership structures that would ensure no single species could dominate the cooperative, even inadvertently. But, perhaps most remarkably, species that had never been involved in galactic politics began emerging from isolation to participate in what they recognized as a unique opportunity to shape their collective future. Dr. Elena Vasquez transmitted her final report on predecessor inscriptions 6 months after Sarah's proposal to the Galactic Council. The translation was complete, and the message from humanity's ancient predecessors was clear. The pattern breakers had succeeded beyond the predecessors' most optimistic projections. The transformation is complete, Elena concluded. According to predecessor mathematical models, the galaxy has now evolved beyond the possibility of returning to domination-based governance. The cooperative structures we've established have become self-reinforcing. Each success makes further cooperation more likely, while each conflict is resolved through methods that strengthen rather than weaken the overall alliance. Sarah read Elena's report while watching the view from her office viewport. New Geneva habitat had expanded again, now incorporating architectural elements from over 60 species. The site was both beautiful and symbolic, a community that grew stronger through diversity rather than weaker through division. Her granddaughter Emma was playing in the park below, part of a mixed species group that included young beings whose biology ranged from crystalline to gaseous to mechanical. They were inventing games that could accommodate everyone's different capabilities, creating rules that ensured everyone could participate meaningfully. It was, Sarah realized, a perfect metaphor for what the galaxy had become. Emma's generation won't remember the Hegemony War, Sarah said to Elena, who was visiting from the archive headquarters. They'll grow up assuming that cooperation between different species is normal, which means they'll be even better at it than we are, Elena replied. Each generation will find new ways to build on what we've started. Sarah's communication system chimed with a priority message from the Deep Space Exploration Initiative. The message was from Captain Marcus Rodriguez, now leading humanity's contribution to the galaxy's first truly cooperative exploration mission. Ambassador Chun, Rodriguez's image said, "We've discovered something you need to see immediately." The transmission switched to sensor readings from the edge of the galactic spiral arm, showing a massive structure that didn't match any known architectural style. "It's artificial," Rodriguez continued, "but the construction techniques are unlike anything we've encountered. The quantum signatures suggest it's incredibly ancient, possibly predating even the predecessor civilization. More importantly," Rodriguez added, "it's been sending out signals since we arrived. Mathematical sequences, star charts, and what appears to be a welcome message in a dozen different languages, including several that we've never seen before." Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. Elena, could this be related to the predecessors? Elena studied the sensor data with growing excitement. Not the predecessors themselves, but possibly their predecessors. "Sarah, we might have found evidence of the pattern breakers from the cycle before theirs." The implications were staggering. If Elena was right, they were looking at proof that the cycle of galactic evolution extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. The predecessors hadn't been the first to break the patterns of domination. They had been part of a much longer chain of civilizations, each building on the achievements of those who came before. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah said, "prepare a full diplomatic expedition. If we're about to meet the galaxy's previous pattern breakers, we need to be ready to learn from their experience." As preparations began for what would become known as the Great Contact, Sarah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought the galaxy to this point. 5 years ago, humanity had faced an ultimatum that seemed to offer only submission or destruction. Instead, they had found a third option that had transformed not just their own civilization, but every civilization in the galaxy. The ancient pattern of domination and resistance had been broken, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a community of truly voluntary cooperation between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. And now, apparently, they were about to discover that they were not alone in having made that choice. The message from the ancient structure continued broadcasting across space, its mathematical sequences slowly resolving into recognizable patterns. But embedded within the mathematics was something else, a kind of cosmic welcome message that seemed to be saying, "Well done. You made the right choice. Now, let us show you what comes next." As humanity prepared to take the next step in galactic evolution, Sarah thought about the choice the predecessors had described: transcendence or continued engagement. Looking at the vibrant community that surrounded her, watching her granddaughter play with friends whose very existence proved that the impossible had become routine, Sarah knew that humanity had already made their choice. They would stay. They would build. They would continue the work of creating something the galaxy had never seen before, a community where every voice mattered, where every form of consciousness was valued, and where the old patterns of domination were not just broken, but forgotten. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And somewhere in the deep archives of human space, the ancient warnings of the predecessors were being quietly updated with a new entry. Pattern successfully broken. New pattern established. Galaxy transformed. Mission complete. The countdown to human submission had become a countdown to galactic evolution. And the timer had finally reached zero, not with humanity's surrender, but with the entire galaxy's transformation into something better than anyone had dared to imagine. High Executor Zethrin, now First Representative Zethrin of the Zerian Commonwealth, stood in his office overlooking the rebuilt capital city of his homeworld. The architecture had changed dramatically over the past 5 years. The towering monuments to hegemony power had been replaced by parks, schools, and community centers designed through collaborative planning sessions that included input from every citizen. His communication system chimed with a message from Ambassador Chun, and he accepted the connection with something that his ancestors would never have understood: genuine pleasure at the prospect of working with a former enemy who had become a trusted colleague. "Representative Zethrin," Sarah said, "we're assembling a joint expedition to investigate the ancient structure Captain Rodriguez discovered. The Zerian Commonwealth's expertise in deep space archaeology could be invaluable to the mission." Zethrin's mandibles clicked in what had once been a gesture of dominance, but had evolved into an expression of enthusiasm. "We would be honored to participate. Our researchers have been analyzing the quantum signatures from your initial reports, and we believe the structure may incorporate technologies that could advance our understanding of consciousness transfer." It was, Zethrin reflected as he ended the communication, a remarkable transformation. 5 years ago, he had commanded the largest military force in galactic history and had been confident that superior firepower would guarantee his success. Now he was contributing archaeological expertise to a cooperative exploration mission, and he had never felt more accomplished or more purposeful. The humans had been right about one thing: there was something better than domination. There was contribution to something larger than yourself. As preparations for the Great Contact Expedition continued, species across the galaxy began to understand that they were approaching another threshold in their collective evolution. The pattern breakers had done more than end the cycle of domination. They had established the foundation for something that previous generations couldn't have imagined. The galaxy was ready to discover what lay beyond cooperation. The ancient structure continued broadcasting its welcome message, patient and eternal, waiting for the galaxy's new pattern breakers to take the next step in their impossible journey. The law of the ancients had been fulfilled. Never provoke humans. They don't obey. But humanity had written a new law to replace it. Never underestimate the power of voluntary cooperation. It can transform the impossible into the inevitable. The pattern was broken. The galaxy was reborn. And the greatest adventures still lay ahead.